the notion of addressing the theme of faith for a fractured world was overwhelming, to say the least. I am indeed grateful for the proclaimers that have come before me, and I also feel the pressure of not wanting to disappoint this moment, a moment where fear and grief have been monetized and monopolized, and everyone from the Sudan to this sacred silo of Davis Chapel is wondering what God has to say about all of this. And so as I contemplated how to enter into this conversation and how to make a contribution to this community of faith, that if I'm lucky will be substantial enough to also bless someone beyond these walls, I was compelled to revisit a text that speaks to a few of the issues we see today in a way that I hope will indeed inspire a greater faith for this fractured world. You all have heard the text already, and so I want you to consider something in addition to the text. In the opening of his book, The Christian Imagination, Theology and the Origins of Race, Reverend Dr. Willie James Jennings takes us to a scene in history that would prove to be critical to how the rest of the world looked at and experienced the relationship that Christianity and race have with one another. The historical moment that Dr. Jennings shares occurred August 8th, 1444, where African bodies were taken from the docks of Portuguese shores to the place that was designated for these African bodies to be examined, selected, auctioned, sold, and even given as tithes to the church. Yeah. These transactions, according to Dr. Jennings' book, took place just outside the city gates. That is the thought that I want you to hold in mind this morning. The term city gates is probably one that conjures pictures of ancient times, times long ago, times so far and so distant that even in your imagination they appear black and white. These are times when walls were used not just to prevent enemy attack, but to deprive those who were for some reason or another deemed unworthy of inclusion and protection. You know, long time ago. A long time ago where if you had a certain disease or contracted a certain condition or fell into a category that was deemed unclean, unholy, impure, not quite right, a little funny, special, if there was something about your physical appearance and or presentation that did not align with the norms that society had set as standard, then a long time ago, you could find yourself outside the city gates. Matter of fact, back then, it didn't even always have to be your fault personally. Sometimes something your parents did could land you outside the city gates. Who, when, and how you laid with someone could land you outside the city gates. But this was a long time ago. This is where we find the main characters of our text. 4 leprous men, no longer allowed to mix and mingle with larger society, no longer allowed to be part of the visible community, no longer allowed to contribute or reap the benefits of being visible and viable participants in the everyday life of the place to which they used to belong. They are outside the city gate. And I know that with us being at Wake Forest and all, surely none of us here know anything about being outside the city gate. So let me share a little bit about what it's like to be outside the city gate. Outside the city gate, food is scarce. Water is brown and contaminated. Medical attention is minimal because your condition has already been identified as chronic and irreversible. Your place in society is fixed. Your education is manipulated negatively by underinvestment and underfunding, and there is little to no social or economic mobility. No new tax bracket. Yes. No real opportunities to elevate outside the city gate. By now, I would believe that you have a picture of some person or persons, some group or groups in your mind, and I am inclined to ask you to pause for a moment, get a good look at them. Who are they? Who do you see Is it a cousin that's been locked up longer than they've been free? Is it a family member that can't shake a substance habit? Is it someone who the system has beaten down so badly that they've resigned themselves to running from their responsibilities and gotten so comfortable living beneath their potential? Is it a loved one with an illness that they used to try to fight, but now they seem to just be allowing their condition to have its way without resistance? Who is it? Is it somebody you knew from school that was supposed to be the next world-changing personality, and somewhere along the way they suffered a death in the family that was close to them at a young age, and it altered the course of their life? Who do you see outside the city gate? I asked this question, yes, for emphasis and resonance, but also to challenge us to interrogate our imaginations. Because the truth is, the same way our systems of oppression put people outside the city gates, our own minds, our own preconceptions, our own limiting ideas of other people's potential, our silent agreement with stereotypes, our pseudo-solidarity, our virtue signaling one way but voting another creates city gates. Just like redlining creates city gates, just like mass incarceration creates city gates, just like broken child care, adoption, and juvenile justice systems create city gates, just like genocidal bombings create city gates, just like immigration enforcement practices that violate human rights create city gates, just like militarized policing creates city gates, just like transphobia, homophobia, and xenophobia create city gates, just like shame creates city gates. Just like some of our church culture creates city gates. City gate isn't just a location in the story of our text, but it is anywhere that reflects a lack of access to opportunity to advance beyond your circumstantial reality. Outside the city gates is where those whose lives, because of systems, statistics, and not so coincidental circumstances, leave them to suffer the most minimal accommodation, the most minimal attention. City gates don't happen accidentally. City gates are strategic and intentional. Who do you see outside the city gate? I see my father. My father's current place of residence is a rehabilitation center in Greensboro. It is a nursing facility where you would think people were being assisted to make progress in their health and eventually rejoin the households and communities that they were originally a part of. It's not the case. In this facility, people are managed until they expire. And a healthcare system infrastructure that throws away its elders and leaves them to rot is a city gate. Yeah. The people here get very little interaction or physical touch if they aren't being medically assisted in some way. The moans, the cries for help, the call bells are all the soundtrack of this establishment. The employees are overworked, underpaid, and undersupported because the facility is understaffed. There are 2 housing project communities within the 3-mile radius, along with a host of motels and smaller, lower income housing communities within walking distance. And yet, all of these people within this community of economic despair and physical debilitation and malady are also within a 4-minute drive of beautiful downtown Greensboro. In other words, this rehabilitation facility, its surrounding community, and these bodies, these stories, these lives, these people live outside the city gate. In the case of our 4 men, it was religious law that constrained their living quarters to outside the city gate. To have leprosy was to be ritually unclean according to Jewish custom, and therefore unable to contact others lest you contaminate them as well. And now these men have a decision to make. They have to decide where and how they're going to die. There's a famine in the land because Ben-Hadad, king of the Arameans, has sieged the city of Samaria, which is the capital city of the northern kingdom of Israel, and he has cut the children off from all the resources of the land. The famine is so bad that if you go back to chapter 6, you'll see the price of the remaining resources in the land were almost completely unaffordable. And the people have even resorted to eating their babies. The animals can't graze, the people can't farm, trade, or fetch water. So the children of Israel that inhabit the northern kingdom are basically trapped within the boundaries of their own city because they know that waiting for them somewhere outside the city gate are not only these lepers, but the Arameans. And yet, even in a time of war and conflict, these 4 men with leprosy, already physically compromised, who perhaps were once integral parts of this community, are required to remain outside the city gates. They're experiencing the famine just like everybody else, but there's no company or community to pull them in and pool resources with. No protection, no provision. On the one side of them is their city, a city that has cast them out and left them for dead. And on the other side of them is the camp of the enemy. Starvation on the one side, slaughter on the other. The text tells us that as the sun is going down, these men have a conversation and they come to the conclusion that whether they stay where the law says they should stay outside the city gates, or whether they attempt to seek asylum amongst the enemy's camp with the Arameans, death is hastily approaching. There's a fascinating component about the human spirit. That component is called dignity. Dignity is the thing inside of a person that says, I ain't going out like this. Has nothing to do with being offended or embarrassed. It has everything to do with the value that one believes their life has, no matter what their past is and no matter what their dire present situation may be. So in an act of dignity, these men decide that when the sun goes down completely and they can blend in a little bit better because nobody will be able to see their leprous condition at night, they decide to cover themselves to give the appearance of travelers. They'll enter the camp of the Arameans as victims of the famine, seeking refuge, and offer themselves as willing servants, knowing that the sun will come up eventually. Their disguise will be discovered eventually, and instead of receiving pity, they'll probably receive the death penalty for infiltrating the Aramean camp and fooling them, but at least they'll get a last meal. At least they won't die alone and invisible outside the city gates. The sun lowers and these men begin to rise. And with only the stars for light, they make their trepidatious trek toward the camp of the Arameans. They take the long way because if they attempt to enter the Aramean camp directly from the side closest to the city gate of Samaria, they'll give themselves away as fugitive infidels and be killed without a second thought. They're rehearsing their lines for when they get questioned. They practice adjusting the tones of their voices so that their accent doesn't give them away. And before you know it, they're inside of the Aramean camp. This is odd. By now, they should have encountered some form of security, right? There's no way they should be able to approach the tent of a camp that was set up for military purposes without being apprehended and questioned. They go in a little bit further. And now, not only have they not been apprehended, they don't even see nobody. No snoring soldiers, no watchmen, no guards. Verse 7 tells us that the Arameans left their horses, their donkeys, all their material possessions, and all their food and fled the camp. These 4 leprous men thought enough of their own lives to try and at least die with a full stomach. And lo and behold, now not only do they have food, but verse 8 tells us they got silver, they got gold, and they got clothes too. See, one of the things that people don't always remember about folk outside the city gate is that just because the only thing that you may associate with the city gate is death and disconnection, it doesn't mean that the people that reside there have internalized those things. How many of us know people from outside the city gate with better manners than people from the right side of the tracks? How many of us know from people from outside the city gates who have blended families but stick together better than people who have the same mama and daddy and the same blood? How many of us know people from outside the city gates that keep a nice home while people in mansions don't even know how to clean up after themselves? See, when you believe the Creator has more for you than the law can keep from you, you don't let the surroundings of what's outside the city gates make it into your soul. And there's plenty of evidence to prove that because my ancestors made meals out of chitlins, pig feet, and ham hock outside the city gates. Oatmeal is better than no meal outside the city gates. They know how to make $1 out of 15 cents outside the city gates. It was all a dream outside the city gates. There is a last-ditch effort outside the city gates. There is gumption outside the city gates. There's imagination outside the city gates. There's one more try outside the city gates. I want to end right here, but I got a couple loose ends to tie up, so I'll do that and get out of y'all's way so y'all can eat. The first loose end that I want to tie up is that we need to look at how the four men handled this fortune. Verse 9 tells us that the men decided to tell the gatekeepers, the ones who were in charge of making sure that they remained outside the city gate, tell them about what they found when they went into the camp of the Arameans so the gatekeepers could get word to the king. This is important, church, not because they're obligated to uphold some standard of virtue, but because in all of their excitement, they didn't forget that their people were at war, and what they found in the camp of the Arameans was not just material blessing, but military victory. These men, despite being dismissed from the physical community, never allowed the community to leave their hearts. So when something good on such a large scale happened for them, they understood their responsibility to share that with the community. Nobody loses when the people at the bottom are taken care of. We've been propagandized to believe that if we help somebody at the bottom, then it'll just lead to them being dependent on the system. We've been propagandized to believe that basic human needs of food, clean water, adequate shelter, and access to health care are merit-based privileges to be earned by your ability to allocate unlivable wages. But in this text, we have examples that proves just the opposite. An example that proves when the least of these get priority access to the resources, the rest of the community flourishes. The next loose end I want to tie up is that we need to observe that God plants opportunities for victory within the paranoia of power. The Aramean camp fled because verse 6 tells us that the Arameans believed that the army of the king of Israel and the Egyptians and the Hittites were going to assist one another in battle and siege them. Verse 12 tells us that the king of Israel's paranoia made him see the empty camp as an ambush attempt. Now, this is not to say that strategically either of these kings were wrong for being safer rather than sorry with how they handled this turn of events, but it is to say that the faith of these four men exposed the fear of two kings. And in similar fashion, when we look at the powerful people of our day, their plans and their strategies, how they move and the decisions they make doesn't just show you how smart they are, it can show you how scared they are too. Seeds of division are sown not because people in power are brilliant, but because they're afraid of the collective power that everyday citizens have when they stand together. People in power try to dominate and legislate women's bodies, not because they're in favor of family, but because they're afraid of living in a society where a woman has the power to tell them no. District lines are redrawn not to increase opportunity for equal voter representation, but because the people with power are afraid of the result of a fair election process. The plans of powerful people don't just show strategy, it shows what they're afraid of. Last thing we need to tie up is how this story ends. In verse 4, I'm inclined to question whether or not the men were even allowed to rejoin this community after coming upon this great catch. But the story that ends this way has questions that are even bigger than my preoccupation with whether or not these men got a chance to rejoice with their fellows. Because the story ends with death. The keeper of the gate, the same gate these four leprous men were forced to remain outside of, the same gate that these four leprous men refused to die at, was trampled to death. The keeper of the gate was trampled to death in that same spot. As the children of Israel rushed to get outside the city gate to the food and the other resources in the deserted camp of the Arameans. Earlier in chapter 7, the prophet Elisha told the keeper of the gate that God was going to turn things around, and his response was, even if the Lord were to make windows in the sky, could such a thing happen? Elisha replied that God would indeed turn things around, but although the keeper of the gate would see it, he would not take part. The keeper of the gate did not believe that God could deliver the children of Israel, and these four men for that matter, from the deadly grip that this famine had on their community. Most people focused on the fact that the keeper of the gate didn't believe God, and that's one takeaway. But using some deductive reasoning, I conclude that the people were pushing toward the resources as they were coming through the gate, and the keeper of the gate was trampled to death. Okay. That means the keeper of the gate died gatekeeping. He died being an obstacle to the community flourishing. And what a sad death to die in opposition to God's will for people to flourish and be cared for and provided for. And it may not even been totally his fault, because the Bible describes the man as the captain on whose hand the king leaned, which means he may have simply been doing the duty he was assigned. But how many times have we heard someone who caused harm to the community say, I was just doing my job? Doing your job is not an excuse to undermine the will of God. And the will of God always promotes the flourishing of humanity. Okay, so back to the king's question. Elisha gives him at the end of chapter 6 an answer. The answer to that question is what we need to take away from this entire sermon. When the king hears that the people are so overwhelmed by the famine that they have resorted to eating babies, he is deeply distressed, and rightfully so. The king, knowing that Elisha is a prophet, declares angrily, this trouble is from the Lord. Why should I hope in the Lord any longer? That question is the last thing recorded in chapter 6. Chapter 7 opens with Elisha's response. Elisha tells the king, thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time a measure of choice meal shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley shall be sold for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. Elisha was telling the king that tomorrow the prices of these goods will be the opposite of what they've been during the famine. Did y'all catch that? Chapter 6 ends with the king declaring angrily, why should I hope in the Lord any longer? Chapter 7 opens with Elisha telling the king, tomorrow. That's it. That's all I stopped by to tell y'all. That's all that I wanted to give you as a form of encouragement, is that no matter how challenging things get, no matter how many times life makes you ask the question, why should I hope in the Lord any longer? You can turn around and be Elisha to yourself and say, tomorrow. Whether you're a king or army veteran or a prophet or a servant living outside the city gate, God has a tomorrow with your name on it. And we can trust that God has a tomorrow with our name on it, because God never leaves us nor forsakes us. I have been young, and now I'm not so young. And in all my days, I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. The prophetess Glorilla said it this way, I can get my feelings hurt today, but I won't even care tomorrow. I don't care about no credit score, because I might be rich somewhere tomorrow. Every day the sun won't shine, but that's why I love tomorrow.